I think 10 years is a good minimum. But
yeah, that'd be because ideally, that has the highest recidivism rate, child predators. And so you don't necessarily want to lock these guys up for 2 years, 3 years, and let them back on the street because you're endangering the public. You're endangering children.
I mean, that's exactly what happened in Massachusetts. While that law was in consideration, there was a guy named Corey Saunders. The psychologist had pleaded with the judge, you can't let this guy out. But the judge said, look, we have to. The sentence is up. He plea bargained for this, he's out. And that guy went right out, found a kid in the library, abused that child, and that's the type of thing that got the legislature to move. But it shouldn't come to that, right? It should not be defense attorneys holding our legislative process hostage on a conflict of interest basis. People have to be aware of these things, and we have to call our legislators on it, that it's not enough for them to say, oh, it's not in this narrow legal definition a conflict of interest. They have to recuse themselves if they're in that category, if it affects their business, whether it's a real conflict of interest or just the appearance of one. People have to have confidence in our legislature, and so they need to sort of have the wisdom to step back and say.
And that's just it, is that it's not even so much as a conflict of interest. If you have the appearance of a conflict of interest, anyone in government, not even just legislatures, anyone in the executive, judiciary branch should recuse themselves. They should basically just say, look, I may not actually have a conflict of interest here, but there may be an apparent one. And so instead of going to the ethics board for a potential review of it and holding up the legislative process, the individual could just recuse themselves.
So what's the answer? Is it, should the voters not elect lawyers? And this will stop conflict of interest, or should we prevent lawyers from serving on two branches of government, executive branch and judiciary branch?
Well, as far as I know, at least for the federal government, I don't know if it actually goes for the state government, but you're generally not allowed to serve in two branches of government. But of course,
well, the Constitution says that,
right.
But history shows
if you're
that
a state
it doesn't.
legislature and you're a lawyer, potentially, you could be an officer of the court. But we shouldn't bar anyone from serving. Saying that you're a lawyer, so therefore you can't serve, as a member of the legislature, I think that's a little much. But what we really should do is we should really reform the ethics laws so that they're not so specific. Because when it comes to ethics, generalized is better. It's not always the case that, if something's more generalized, it's better. But in terms of ethics, it really is. That there should be a generalization, not a specific that if your business or you personally are going to profit. It should be, look, if you're a member of a class that is going to profit from this legislation, then you have a conflict of interest. And so that really is the reform we need.
Well, you're running for state senate, and your opponent is Senator Bedore, Stephen Bedore.
Yes, who served the district quite well.
Okay, and basically, what conflict of interest? What conflict of interest do you see in Senator Bedore? My understanding is he is a lawyer. He works out of a law firm from a local judge as well, I believe is Judge Mary Manzi. How is that not a conflict of interest? He's passing bills.
Well, I think there's one very specific one that's at least an appearance of a conflict of interest, which is I believe his wife works at the probation department. And so she may be an excellent employee, but you have to question, was there any influence there in getting her hired at probation, given that so many legislators have gotten people working there?
Especially, with the Globe report, indicating that probation is pretty much full of patronage jobs. Whether or not, Senator Bedore actually persuaded the hiring of his wife, we don't know that. But again, it stinks. We don't, given everything that's occurred, we can never be sure whether he did or he did not influence the hiring of his wife. That to say, what should we do about that now? I don't know. But, as I stated previously on a radio show, is that my wife, my family members will not be getting state jobs. I don't think that should occur because if nothing else, it is an apparent conflict of interest. That if I were to be elected and all of a sudden my wife was given a state job, well, how'd she get that job? Because prior to my election, she wasn't looking for a state job.
The thing, too, legislators have to be smart about this when you have a close family member working for a state agency is that even if the legislator themselves didn't influence their family member to get a job in that state agency, it does create now a conflict of interest where that legislator is going to be voting on budgets, and they're going to have to make decisions between giving money to one agency or another. And if you've got some agencies larded over with relatives and supporters of certain legislators, then that's going to influence how they apportion the budget. And one thing we see now with our taxes, they've cut the taxes to local aid, to the municipalities, but they have not cut it to certain key agencies that have a lot of patronage
Like
hires.
probation.
Like probation, right?
Yeah.
And so, there's a...
a conflict of interest would be, it comes up with the hiring too. Like if I were elected and then all of a sudden my wife applied for a state job, now you're going to have a potential hiring manager looking at her going, well, her husband is a state senator. So if I don't hire her, that might actually have negative repercussions for me. So I better hire her because that way, if nothing else, I won't be, taking some negativity from that. At least then I won't be looked down upon. And even if that hiring manager doesn't gain anything from hiring a family member, at least then they won't be punished for not hiring. So I guess, but Senator Baddour has an apparent conflict of interest, if not an outright one, with his wife working in probation, but also too, as the papers have been publishing, with his charity. And we come to find out that the dental pack gave his charity a lot of money, and this has all been published in the Tribune. And then he's voting on legislation to give the dentist higher reimbursements. Well, he himself wouldn't benefit from the legislation, and maybe as he stated, the donation didn't influence his vote. It stinks.
Every legislator says the same thing. Lobbyists come into our state house and they give political contributions, and every legislator says, well, I took the contributions, but these things don't affect my judgment, they don't affect my legislation, I don't look at the list of contributors. But if you look at some of these lobbyists, they will give $200, $300 to every single legislator every year. And are they such great Democrats, such patriots that they want to?
Why are they giving you money? They're giving you money because they hope to influence your vote. That's the only reason you support someone.
The lobbyists think it works.
Now,
right?
the bill that was just signed with the budget, which should be preventing the lobbying going on in the State House, should that solve the problem?
We had a real solution to that problem a few years ago with the Clean Elections Law, which mandated public financing of elections. And this is something that people, through a huge amount of effort, stood up for. They've got that passed on a ballot initiative. And the legislature refused to fund it. And a few years later, they killed it on a voice vote.
Well, and that's not the first time that the legislature has ignored the will of the people. I mean, you just have to, 2000, the vote to repeal the raise in the income tax. That never went down to where the vote actually said it should go. They stopped it at 5.3% instead of putting it back down to 5%. So, yeah, you're right. And not only did that Clean Elections Law, what it actually would have done, there's a great power of incumbency to being reelected. I'm facing a challenger who has a huge war chest. And with the Clean Elections Law, it actually might have leveled the playing field for people who, like myself, have never been in politics, don't have a substantial amount of resources behind you, but want to actually change the system and want to give the people a real voice. And we had the opportunity to do that, and we did. We voted for it. But the legislature turned around and ignored the will of the people once again.
Who's exempt from conflict of interest?
Well, I think any person that has more than one interest has, potentially will face conflicts. They have to be smart about when they're facing a conflict, have the ethical, sense to say, well, in this particular case, or if somebody warns them, it looks bad for you to be voting on this, to take a step back and say, maybe someone else should handle this.
And I think that's where, a real good sense of character, has to come into play, because it can be hard to ignore the financial gain that you might get from voting one way. Or not even voting with. We always have these conflicts in us about, if I do this, I'll get this amount of money, but I might upset somebody over here. And so those always exist within us, but it takes character, to say, I do have a conflict of interest here, and if nothing else, to report it. I mean, conflicts of interest are conflicts of interest that might be apparent. They might not be real, though they, one people might think it's not a conflict. But if you're open about it, if you can state up front, look, these are my interests. These are the things that I have that might be an apparent conflict. Then someone else might be able to say, yeah, that is a conflict of interest, and maybe you should sit this out. So if nothing else, if it were open, and they really reported it, then other people might actually make real determinations as to whether it's a conflict of interest, as opposed to allowing the individual to make that decision for themselves.
And if you're elected as the next state senate, what can people expect from you?
Well, one, they can expect an open meeting system. They can expect that no matter what I am doing as a state senator, they'll know about it. Any meeting the minutes will go up on my website. The list of attendees will be there. They can, they'll get a representative in the state senate that actually listens to them and actually will carry out their will, won't ignore their votes, because the will of the people supersedes that of the legislature, supersedes that of the judiciary and the executive branch. We live in a representative democracy, but when the people do speak, their voice needs to be listened to.
And if people wanted to donate to your campaign or wanted to support you in your campaign, where do they go? How do they find you? How do they get in touch with you?
The easiest way would go to www.electseandowning.com, or they can catch me on Facebook. But with the website, all the information is there. I actually have some of the issues up about reducing taxes, about restoring a balance in the two-party system, and also ending some of the perks that elected officials have. Not necessarily a conflict of interest, but Channel 5 did a story about legislatures being paid to travel to work, and that they can double dip. They can get reimbursed from that from two sources, from their campaign funds and from the actual government. That's all got to end.
And Mr. Baptista, real quickly, if anybody out there wants to look at any of the articles or visit your website, how do they reach you?
I think you just go to Massachusetts-election-2010.com. If you Google Massachusetts Election 2010, it'll be right there. And this is just a personal project that I felt that people should be better informed, more involved in elections this year. And so it's just a place that I've been trying to gather as much information as I can. I'd like candidates to come and log in, write their opinions, communicate with the public. And, I think that this year is especially important that people get involved.
I want to thank you guys for coming in. I want to thank the staff at MCTV and the crew behind the scenes that brings you the pictures into your homes. Watch us next time as we go behind the scenes to ask the tough questions, bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Thank you for watching.